Hello, let's look closely at the decorative painted details on these authentic Los Alebrijes. What do you see? What kinds of patterns are there? What colors? Would you consider them bright colors, dull colors? What kind of paint strokes? How did they fit the design on the animal's body? Is it symmetrical? Asymmetrical? What things pop out at you really easily? What kind of detail can you see? What are some other words you would use to describe what is featured on these alebrijes? So when I'm looking, I notice that there are shapes, that there are lines that might go around those shapes. The shapes are on big, open, important areas on the animal or silly areas. I can see the eyes really well because there's white. The painting is mostly lines and dots. There's a few filled areas of color, but they're very small, like less than dime-sized. There's some bands going around the legs, around the necks. There's some feather patterns. There's stripes and dashes. There's triangle shapes, circular shapes, heart shapes. So here is a list of some of the things that you might have noticed. You might see concentric shapes, which means shapes inside of shapes. You might see shapes posed along a line like those triangles. You might see fur, scales, spirals, petals, flowers, hearts. So make sure that when you are going to use a paint pen on your alebrije that it is dry. I got a piece of scrap paper that's the same color or similar color as my alebrije, so I can begin to test the pens on that color. What pops out? What blends in? Maybe sometimes you want to blend in with your alebrije. Sometimes you might want to make color pop. Notice I'm shaking these paint pens and I'm pressing them onto the paper to get the paint moving. You want to try and keep the tip of a paint pen very nice so you won't drag it or scrape it harshly. You will just kind of press it lightly and use it kind of like a paintbrush. So I'm starting with a lighter color on my medium value bird. That will pop out a little bit, and I'm going to think about making a symmetrical design. So look at the pace that I'm moving the marker. It's very slow to allow time for the paint to come out through the felt tip and land on our paper. This is not a quick process. Also notice I'm not coloring in a big space. I'm using lines. I'm holding the bird still with one hand. I'm anchoring both hands down onto the table to keep everything still and to have more control. So let's look at contrast. I'm using a very light white to pop and make the design contrast a little bit more on the medium toned bird. What else can contrast? Well, you can use complementary colors. If you have a very light creature, maybe you will use very dark lines to contrast. So one complementary color that's across from teal is kind of an orange color. Also red would really pop on blue. So if I got out some complementary colors that would really pop out of my bird. Here's a very light pale orange that I'm using, like a sherbet color. Again, lots of lines. Concentric shapes I'm doing here, making the heart grow bigger and bigger. And then you can decide, how do you want to fill spots? Do you fill a small spot? Do you add textures and designs inside of different shapes? Basically, any mark you make can be expanded upon and used to make your animal even more detailed. Here I'm gonna not forget the underside and decide on a shape. There might be symbols in your life that you like to think about. For some reason, this shape makes me think of a soul. I remember I want to make my eyes pop, so I'm going to use white to make a little eye shape, and then I'll use a very dark color so that I can see the eyes on my bird. Sometimes the heel of my hand is resting on the table, so I have even more control of my markers, especially if I'm doing small detail like this line. Giving your elbows and hands something stable to rest on makes your marker even more controlled. And I decided I wanted to accentuate these feathers with some more contrast. Remember, one other thing you can use is bands. Some pigeons and birds have a band around their neck. So I thought this was a detail I could add. As you work, be sure and keep caps on your markers and take really good care of them. Be sure and share whichever ones you aren't using with the people around you.